City of Zimar, Sofra Prefecture, Taldor. First days of winter, 4718. Aurelius, Demi, Diyanah, and Marius were standing over the dead body of their great enemy, Grand Strategos Maxillar Pytherius, and the unconscious body of Maxillar's right-hand man and card-carrying member of the evil order known as the Immaculate Circle, Mylan Jareth, an immortal Rakshasa. The mood should have been celebratory. They had finally dispatched their great foe, but a sending spell from Martella had changed everything. Grand Princess Eutropia had just been assassinated. They had been warned that something like this might happen by the Baroness of Blood herself, the dread vampire Nenarine Adela, who had, until moments ago, appeared to have been a close ally of Pytherius and Mylan's. "I was right, wasn't I?" she said smugly to Aurelius, after he had received the sending spell. "We have to get back to Meratt County," said Aurelius to the others, generally ignoring the vampire. "Wait," said Nenarine. "There's one more thing you will need to see." "Another trick?" asked Demi, annoyed. "A treasure room." "Oh yeah," said Diyanah. "That seems worth sticking around for." "And an old acquaintance," she added. She led them to the end of the hall and pushed open a door. The room didn't smell like a treasure room, though there was a large sealed vault in one corner of it. This large suite reeked of human body odor and alcohol, and there was a large four-poster bed around which once fine clothes lay scattered about. A disheveled man stumbled out of the bed in a dressing gown. He looked so out of sorts that it took the party a few moments to recognize him. This was Grand Prince Stavian III. He had never died during the Exaltation Day massacre. He had simply been captured and brought here by Pytherius, in case he might be of later use to the Grand Strategos. The party let out a collective gasp. "And just in case you don't understand which side I'm on now, here's the key to the vault," said Nenarine. "And that man is exactly who you think he is. Hopefully this proves I'm trying to help you, not setting traps at this point. Oh, and you'll need this glyph necklace." She tossed it to Aurelius, who caught it mid-air. "This will allow you to ignore the keep's dimensional lock protections, and permit you to teleport out of here when you're ready." Aurelius cast a quick identify spell just to confirm, and then slipped the necklace on over his neck. "Thanks, Baroness," he said with a little hesitation in his voice. Diyanah was eagerly clutching at the keys, ignoring all of this, and stepping into the room and looking at the large vault wheel. Aurelius went to help Diyanah with the vault, while Demi and Marius stepped towards the disheveled-looking deposed emperor. "What are you doing here?" asked Demi carefully.
"Maxillar said I was to be kept safe from the assassins," spat the emperor. "But I have not been treated with the decorum and dignity required for my station. When I get out of here, heads will roll."
Marius stepped forward towards the Grand Prince with her.
"Do you remember a young man named Calbio?" he asked cautiously. "Do you remember what you did to him?" "I don't remember any Calbio," said Stavian bitterly. He was old and confused. "Come on, you must remember him," said Marius, slightly annoyed. "He was the one to be honored at the Exaltation Day, the Weaver."
Oh yes," said Stavian, some faint memory entering his clouded mind. "A soft, meek young man, unworthy of better station. What better show of how hard we'd fallen? I gave him the only honor he deserved, a quick death."
"So, you were indeed yourself when you did that,"
muttered Marius. He glanced at Demi. Demi met his eyes. An understanding passed between them. Marius popped the blade on Coriana's fist, and quick as a flash he drove it through the old emperor's heart. Grand Prince Stavian III died instantly. Marius rolled him onto the bed.
"Eutropia already mourned her father," said Marius to Demi. "With everything that's happened, what's one last secret to keep?"
Demi put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I agree," she said simply. Meanwhile, Diyanah and Aurelius had opened the vault door. There they found over 80,000 gold pieces, divided into collections of minted platinum bars, gold bars, and coinage in both platinum, gold, and silver currency. They poured this all into their various bags of holding for safekeeping. They also found two more significant items, the two key symbols of Taldor's head of state, the Primogen Rod and the Primogen Crown. Both were powerful magical relics of old Taldor, but unlike some of the other powerful relics the party had uncovered, these items would only confer their powers to one who had been crowned as the Grand Prince of Taldor. It was gutting to have finally found these, in tandem with the death of the Grand Princess. They took them nonetheless, and regrouped. Diyanah and Aurelius didn't question Marius and Demi's decision to kill Stavian when they did so. "Are we ready to go back?" asked Demi. "Yes," said Aurelius, "but I want to bring Nenarine with us when we go. I don't know that I trust her yet, but I want to hear her out and understand what she knows. Also, I don't know what to do with Mylan just yet, so we're dragging him with us as well. As a reminder, I can't teleport any more than 4 people in addition to myself, so here's what I'm thinking. I teleport to Stakis with Nenarine, Mylan, but also with Diyanah and Raja, just to make sure Nenarine doesn't try anything. Then, after I've teleported back there, I'll summon Demi and Marius to me with the Scion's dagger. Does that work for everyone? Of course, said Demi. Marius and I will be just fine here on our own for a few moments. See you shortly. Diyanah grabbed the unconscious body of Mylan and threw him over his shoulder, and then he gathered up with Raja, Aurelius, and Nenarine. In a flash, they were gone. The familiar town of Stakis, Tandak Prefecture, Taldor, early winter. The last time Aurelius had been in Stakis was in the late days of summer, so it was much changed by the season. Sofra Prefecture in the far south of the country didn't show the seasons as clearly as did the Tandak Prefecture. Here the leaves had fallen off many of the trees, a cold wind was in the air, and Aurelius could see in the sky the faintest hint of snowflakes whipping in the wind, the first flurries of the season. He was suddenly glad for the thick lion cloak he now wore, and he pulled it tightly around him. Of course, it wasn't just cold due to the season. The party had decided to break into the fortress of Abadar's pillar at 3 or 4 in the morning, hoping this timing would catch the keep's defenders off guard. Based on the sunlight just now starting to creep up over the eastern valley, Aurelius guessed it was 6 or 7 in the morning already. He had decided not to teleport directly into the Bettony estate. He was always worried about surprise ambushes, and given the death of the princess, it seemed smart to be cautious. He instead had teleported them on the main road, a few minutes' walk from the gates of the keep, just so he could scope out the land before he arrived. Not far down the road, Aurelius saw a familiar face on patrol despite the early hour. It was Sheriff Honora Piscum, the half-elf that had welcomed them to the Bettony estate when they had first arrived in Meratt, which now felt like a lifetime ago. "Baron Betnos," she cried, "you're back! I'd heard you and the others were still in Mehetto after your victory against Pytherius." "I returned by magical means," said Aurelius, and to add to this effect he used the magic of the overland flight spell he was now habitually casting to hover over to where Honora was. He was shortly followed by Diyanah, Raja, and Nenarine, plodding along on foot. "Have there been any unusual visitors to town in the last couple of days?" asked Aurelius. "Nothing comes to mind," said Honora. "Stakis is a nicer place since you invested in it, so we get more visitors now than we have in previous years, but nothing that I would describe as particularly suspicious." "And the Bettony estate, it's secure?" he asked. "I check on it every couple of days. No unwanted visitors last I checked." And then, recognizing that Aurelius seemed even more cautious than usual, she asked, "You have a nervous look, Lord Baron. What's happened?" "I'm afraid that Eutropia's been assassinated," explained Aurelius. Honora gasped, but Aurelius didn't give her a chance to respond. "Martella's going to meet us here in the Betnos estate. I believe she's riding down from the Palace of Birdsong. We'll meet her in the afternoon. I just want to make sure that there are no surprises waiting for us in Stakis. I'll make sure to alert the town watch for signs of trouble, and I'll send additional guards to the estate as well." She looked over at the vampire Nenarine suspiciously, though. "Who's your new friend?" she asked. "An ally of convenience for now," said Aurelius. "Speaking of which, best to bring the others in now." He activated the Scion's dagger. Suddenly beside him appeared Demi, Marius, and of course Rankle, who had gone with the elves to the distant elven kingdom of Keonan after the Battle of Mehetto Fields. Rankle seemed exceedingly annoyed. "Really, Aurelius, again?" "Oh, Rankle," said Aurelius. "I'm sorry. I swear, this time I'll remember to unbind you from the dagger's magic before I activate it again. We'll get you back to Keonan as soon as we have a spare moment." "I was literally in the middle of a conversation with the Queen," he said with frustration. "She's going to be absolutely livid with me. You can't just disappear on a monarch like that." "We're kind of in the middle of a crisis here as well," said Demi. "Eutropia has been assassinated." Rankle's jaw dropped, and he stood dumbfounded before them. All that work to get her crown swept away in an instant. Before any of them could explain anything further, Aurelius's keen arcane senses told him someone was trying to open a scrying portal. It was undoubtedly the Elven Queen. Aurelius opened it on his end as well. "Queen Talandia," he said as she came into view, "my sincere apologies for whisking Rankle away so abruptly. It was an accident, and it won't happen again." "See to it that it doesn't," she said angrily through the portal. "Rankle and I were in the middle of something. What's the fastest way for you to return him to the Silver Citadel?" "My queen," said Rankle, "something terrible has just happened in Taldor. Grand Princess Eutropia, whom you had helped win the war, has just been assassinated." Talandia took in a sharp intake of breath, but replied quickly, "3 of the great owls were killed in Eutropia's war, as were a half-dozen of our own soldiers. Eutropia had promised Captain Dindaniel that she would return the favour should we face a similar threat in our own country.
I would assume this group would work with all expediency to have your new queen resurrected as soon as possible."
"That's what we intend to do, Your Majesty," said Aurelius. "But there may be some complications. We believe her assassination was orchestrated by a powerful wizard, which we had presumed dead, but who was an expert in the manipulation of souls in the afterlife. We're still getting all the facts, but resurrection may not be so simple as we might hope." Talandia wrinkled her brow in annoyance.
"Your Majesty," said Rankle, "I know I've only just entered into your service, but I request permission to remain here in Taldor and to see this through. I will work with this group to bring back the princess. Let me do this one last task for Taldor, and then I will return with you to Keonan."
Talandia gave her slow assent.
"I concur. The debt of the Taldan monarch is of great value to me. Please see to it that you bring her back. And, Lord Baron, please know that this is the last time you will be able to call upon Rankle to solve your domestic troubles."
"Understood, Your Majesty," said Aurelius with a hint of embarrassment in his voice. Talandia closed the scrying portal and was gone. The party debriefed Rankle as they walked the winding Stakis road to the estate, the crisp winter air biting at their faces. As they walked, they could see that the fields lay bare now, the last remnants of autumn's harvest long gathered, and a faint morning mist was clinging to the low hills of the vineyards that Diyanah and Anlel had helped grow in the lands around the estate. Soon enough, the familiar silhouette of the Bettony estate rose in the distance, its stone walls standing firm against the cold. The great iron gates opened at Aurelius's command, and the familiar sight of the courtyard was a momentary comfort. Here, within these walls, they could speak freely, gather their thoughts, and decide what came next. The Domovoy had kept the place in good repair, as they were wont to do. The party knew that Nod, Blunk, and Wink would be excited to see them, but they would keep their distance, because Honora and Nenarine had accompanied them inside. The Domovoy never made their presence known when the lord of the manor was hosting guests. The party gathered in the drawing room, which had a few couches and a nice view of the back garden. Here most of the party kept watch over the two members of the Immaculate Circle, while Aurelius went up to his library to have a look around for something. He came back with a book that had a number of magical scrolls tucked into it. Aurelius had not always carried on his person all of the scrolls that they had collected in their earlier adventures. It had always been too many to sort through, but he did know there was one here that would serve his purpose. He approached the unconscious form of Mylan Jareth. It was tricky to deal with enemies like the Rakshasa that could forever reincarnate, but not impossible, he thought. Aurelius drew out a scroll that had been beyond his ability to copy over into his spellbook at the time he had acquired it. Now it didn't take him long to do the necessary work. Transferring the spell consumed the scroll, but he had learned the casting method. He spoke the words as he carved arcane sigils in the air. The magic took root in the Rakshasa, a flesh-to-stone spell. Despite the Rakshasa's innate resistance to magic, Aurelius's power and the gifts granted to him by the Mantle of Kings proved sufficiently strong to overcome these magical defenses, and soon enough Mylan had been turned into a statue. "Okay," said Aurelius. "Now we don't have to worry about Mylan waking up." Then, after a pause, he added, "Well, we've been up all night, and Martella will get here in the morning. We should get some rest, but maybe we should do this in shifts?" He eyed Nenarine suspiciously as he said this. Nenarine seemed annoyed that she was still not being trusted by the party. "No need," said Demi. "I don't need to sleep, and Raja was a statue most of the day, and Honora is here with us. You all go get some sleep. I'll catch up with our new vampire friend." "You sure you're okay, just you and the other two?" asked Marius. "We'll be fine," replied Demi. Then her eyes flitted to the raven perched on Aurelius's shoulder. "Oh, but Aurelius, leave Rodrigo with us too. That way Honora has a way of getting in touch with the rest of the town watch, without having to head to town." That was good enough for them. Aurelius, Marius, and Diyanah went to get a few hours' sleep before the afternoon. As they did so, downstairs, Honora stepped into an adjoining room for a moment, with Rodrigo, to pen some orders the raven familiar could deliver to the town watch, while Demi and Raja took a seat across from Nenarine in the drawing room. "All right, Nenarine, we have a few hours before we reconvene," said Demi. "Tell me a bit about yourself, and how the Immaculate Circle came to be." Nenarine leaned back in her chair, studying Demi with what seemed like a calculated expression. The light of the dawn was creeping through the large drawing-room windows, casting long shadows across the room and highlighting her pale features. Demi noted that Adela was not the kind of vampire that burst into flames in the sunlight. She supposed she had known this already from the Battle of Mahetto Fields. Adela exhaled slowly. "You wish to know about me, about the Immaculate Circle. Where to begin?" "Start at the beginning," said Demi. "Assume I know nothing." "Very well, it's a long story, but the beginning it is. I was born with the wrong blood, a bastard, a mistake. The Adela name once commanded fear and respect, but for me it was nothing but a chain, binding me to a life of shame.
I was shuffled from one relative to another, hidden away, an embarrassment to be whispered about but never acknowledged. Her lips curled in distaste. Imagine a family so obsessed with purity they couldn't even bear to look at their own kin because of a little elven blood. Nenarine let out a humourless chuckle. Her gaze flicked briefly to Demi. I spent my youth dreaming of a cure. Surely, I thought, there'd be some way to strip away what made me unacceptable. I studied medicine, alchemy, anything that could reshape the body. My family saw promise in my work and funded my studies. Not out of kindness, mind you, but so I could repay them in kind. Anyway, the most astute masters of the sciences I was studying could be found in the University of Lepidstadt in Ustalav. I learned the trade of poisons and transformation. I studied the weaknesses of flesh, the secrets of blood. What I didn't know at the time was that the true masters of the secrets contained in our blood live in the deepest shadows of Ustalav, the vampires. My quest for knowledge brought me inexorably closer to them. And after you returned, asked Demi. I never reconnected with my family, though I eventually returned to Taldor. The girl that the Adelas cast aside was long dead. After that, I became whomever I wished to be, a duchess, a lady of the court, a whispered name in the halls of power. Some of my family eventually recognized me for whom I was. They took to calling me the Duchess of Blood, noted Demi. Yes, I've heard. She spread her hands as if presenting herself. And that is what led me to the Immaculate Circle. Power begets power, and secrets are the currency of eternity. Panavar Lothid found me a century ago. He said he recognized me for what I was, one of the few truly worthy of an immortal rule. Nenarine's gaze darkened. He said the nobility of Taldor was stagnant fools, clinging to crumbling legacies. But those of us who would join him in the circle, we would see the truth, that the power of the worthy should never be allowed to fade. Yes, I'd gathered this much. This is what you and Panavar have spent the last 100 years doing, trying to rule Taldor from the shadows, confirmed Demi. That was our aspiration, but it never really came to pass, not truly. When Dominus II passed power to Stavian II, our little alliance was in its infancy, but we nevertheless found ways to ingratiate ourselves to Stavian II, so we could in turn get access to Stavian III. We had influence with Stavian III, but were not close enough to the throne to be in total control. Then, when Prince Carius died, that was Panavar's chance to really shape the next Grand Prince. He stole Carius's soul, and the rest you know. So why the sudden change of heart? Asked Demi. Did you suddenly just get tired of being evil all of a sudden? What changed as you managed to kill Panavar? I may have said this before, but Panavar was a terrifying figure. Though younger than me by a couple 100 years, he was much more powerful than I am. His tricks, his plots within plots. I don't know when exactly, but at a certain point it became clear to me that everyone was a puppet to him, me included. Okay, but during the war, you and Mylan supported Pytherius, said Demi forcefully. So if you are going to switch sides, why not then? Why now? Don't lump me in with Mylan, okay? Nenarine said bitterly. He, like most of the others, became infatuated with Panavar. He never truly believed you destroyed him, so he just kept blindly following Panavar's plan, presuming that someday he'd make a triumphant return. And you? Asked Demi. And me, I was worried about Panavar's contingencies going into effect. I was worried about what might happen if you killed Pytherius. I felt a Pytherius victory would give me more time to figure out what Panavar's plans might be. But you've done that now, so much for that plan. Now, you are my last recourse. Because you think Panavar carved off a piece of his soul to possess Carius, and that this remnant of him may want to take its revenge on you because you didn't help him in Leng. That's what you said, right? Exactly, said Nenarine. I want to help you kill Carius, so I don't have to spend the rest of eternity looking over my shoulder. And then what? Asked Demi. If you survive this, what are your plans here in Taldor? I'm done with Taldor, said Nenarine plainly. I should have been done with Taldor a long time ago, but then I met Panavar and everything changed. If I'm alive after all this, I'll go to Geb, where they welcome the undead. Maybe try to make a name for myself as one of the Bloodlords. Demi nodded wearily. Okay, new line of inquiry, she said after a beat. Tell me about the surviving members of the Immaculate Circle. There are only 2 left besides me, Count Baron B. Goom and Earl Travarak Denzani. Tell me about them, said Demi. Nenarine let out a quiet sigh, stretching her fingers as if to keep them from growing stiff. The first one you'll want to worry about is Count Baron B. Goom, she said. He's probably the most dangerous of the 2, an old hunter, who turned himself into something monstrous in pursuit of his immortality. Demi tilted her head slightly. Go on. Nearly a century ago, he was said to be the greatest hunter in all of Taldor. He tracked and slew beasts no one else dared to face. The dragon of the Borderwood, the night beast of Karkuru, the plague serpents. There's an old legend that if you hunt and consume the heart of a monarch of the wild hunt, you will gain everlasting youth. I guess Goom figured as the greatest hunter in the land, he could easily do this. Nenarine chuckled dryly. Turns out a monarch of the wild hunt is more cunning than any mortal hunter. Instead of slaying his quarry, Goom was the one who got caught. And as punishment for his hubris, the monarch transformed him into one of its own, a servant of the wild hunt, bound to the first world for eternity. Demi blinked. Doesn't quite sound like the outcome he wanted. Not in the slightest, Nenarine agreed. But his wife Jirabel was as stubborn as he was. She spent a decade tracking down that same monarch, and against all odds she actually killed it. That should have been the happy ending, right? Husband freed, wife victorious? She let the silence stretch for a moment. Goom didn't see it that way. He was horrified that she had succeeded where he had failed. So he strangled her in her sleep the very night they were reunited. Demi's expression darkened. Charming. Oh, he's a monster all right, and he doesn't prance around in fine silks like Mylan. He's practical, a true predator. He spent the past century as a Circle's tracker, finding whatever rare creatures or alchemical reagents the rest of us needed. He doesn't talk much. He just finds things and kills them. And what about the other one, Denzani? Nenarine waved a hand dismissively. The dopant king. Grand Duchess Malia Denzani's long-lost second cousin. He was like me, an alchemist, a student of the esoteric sciences. As a scion of the most important family of the Kazan prefecture, he spent a fortune gathering scholars, sponsoring research into immortality, thinking he could just buy his way to eternity. And in the end, he kind of did. Demi crossed her arms. And how did he do that? He rediscovered an old Aslanti process, one that turns a person into a sentient, shape-shifting ooze. Denzani poured every coin he had into becoming one. He's become immortal now, but in spite of his moderate talent for alchemy, he's never been as clever or as useful as the rest of us. Despite the fact that his liquid metal body can take any form, he rarely takes any that are particularly interesting. Mostly he just turns his arms into blades to torture his victims. Oh yes, I should mention he's something of a sadist, though frankly that could be said of all of them. You have some wonderful-sounding friends, Demi said snidely. I never claimed to be better than them myself. I'm just tired of pretending I can run this country, or even pretending that I'd care to if I could. At least you sound like you're being truthful, said Demi, studying her carefully. Honesty is the only card I have left to play, observed the vampiress. Demi had finished asking her questions. The additional security forces that Honora had requested had arrived, and Demi instructed them to patrol the grounds, and kept a few to keep the interior of the estate safe as well. She kept a watchful eye on Nenarine as she did this, but Nenarine seemed to be perfectly happy waiting patiently in the drawing room. It was not long before the rest of the group began to stir. After a short, late-morning brunch, which Diyanah pretended to make in the kitchen when in fact he was catching up with the estate's domovoy and assigning Blink the task of making the food, a knock at the door announced that Martella Lothide had arrived to meet with them. Martella noticed Nenarine Adela with a start. What is she doing here? She asked incredulously, recognizing the woman that had nearly killed her at the Battle of Maheto Fields. Nenarine, for her part, merely raised a delicate eyebrow. Good morning to you too, Lady Lothide, she said with an air of amusement. Martella turned to Aurelius, her expression demanding an explanation. Why is she in your drawing room instead of in a coffin? Aurelius sighed and gestured for Martella to step inside fully. She surrendered, and she's been helpful, sort of. Martella folded her arms. Helpful how? Demi spoke up. Nenarine has told me everything she knows about the remaining members of the Immaculate Circle, Baron Bigum and Travarak Denzani. She also thinks Panavar might have left a piece of himself inside Carius. Martella's brow furrowed. That makes sense. I'd begun to suspect something like that might have happened. Nenarine tilted her head, watching the conversation unfold with a neutral expression. I have no reason to lie. Panavar was a master of contingencies, and I have no interest in seeing what kind of nightmare he left behind. I want to see Carius dead before I find out firsthand. Martella's lips curled in distaste. And after that, you expect us to let you walk free? Nenarine gave a small, elegant shrug. Yes, I think one good turn deserves another. Martella glanced at Demi, then at Marius, then finally at Diyanah, who was leaning against a wall, arms crossed. And you're all right with this?
Not exactly, said Diyanah. But Demi says she's not lying, and Demi always knows when someone is lying, so whether that means we should trust her or not, I don't know, that's another matter.
Martella frowned, but didn't immediately object. Instead, she took a measured breath as she pinched the bridge of her nose. Fine, we'll deal with her later. Right now, we have a bigger problem. Nenarine's suspicions are almost certainly true. Carrier started acting very odd almost immediately after Eutropia died. Aurelius exchanged a look with the others. Tell us what happened. We were still in Meratt when you all went to Zemar to hunt down Pytherius. There was still a lot to deal with in Kreris Prefecture after the last battle. Eutropia had been holding court all day. Then she retired to a private room in the Grand Duke's citadel. Then, the next thing I knew, Eutropia's private retinue of Ulfen Guard sounded the alarm. They were posted outside her room, and had heard the sounds of a struggle from a bedroom early in the morning. Someone must have teleported in. This would never have happened in the Opara Palace. We have magical shielding against that sort of thing. Martella cursed bitterly that they hadn't been better prepared for such a situation. They didn't reach her in time, but they apprehended the killer, another Norgorberite assassin.
Those bastards again, said Diyanah.
So then naturally, said Martella, I asked for a cleric to be brought to the Meratt Keep to resurrect her, while I went to interrogate the assassin. I wanted to find out who had sent him, how he had gotten there, and so on.
And then what happened? Asked Marius.
Well, while I was interrogating the assassin, Marius had apparently started barking orders at the Ulfen Guard. They obeyed him implicitly.
Of course they would, said Rankle. They're unswervingly loyal to the crown, and Marius is technically the next in line to be Grand Prince.
Well, he took the body, said Martella. The cleric I asked for never reached her. It doesn't look like he's planning to have her resurrected. He had one of the more proficient wizards from among the Arcanists lent to us by Grand Duke Avanathus teleport him and the Ulfen Guard back to Opara. He's insisted on being crowned right away.
We'll need to get her body back if we plan to resurrect her, added Rankle.
I know that, but I don't know where Marius has taken it. I didn't want to go to Opara myself before I debriefed with all of you, because I suspected that something was off with Marius, and I didn't want to do anything to question his orders in case I ended up being labelled an enemy of the state myself. Kill Marius, said Nenarine, and then you will have all the time in the world to find Eutropia's body.
No,
said more or less everyone at once. With a little more calm in her voice than the others, Demi spoke up. With all due respect, Nenarine, you don't have the same set of priorities as the rest of us. The way resurrections work, there is a limited amount of time between the moment of death and the point at which resurrection is no longer possible. When a person dies, their soul journeys to the boneyard, where they wait to be sorted by Pharasma's court. Once a soul has been assigned to one of the afterlives, that's it. No resurrection possible. They exist in a new form altogether, no longer compatible with their old corporeal self.
So, Demi, since you're an expert in these things, how long do we typically have? Asked Marius.
It depends on the soul, said Demi, and how complicated their life was. In the simplest scenario, it can take as little as 48 hours for a soul to work its way through a court.
Okay, so we have to assume worst-case scenario then, said Aurelius.
He looked pointedly at Nenarine.
You've made your perspective known, but our priority is bringing back Eutropia. Then we can worry about Marius.
Nenarine groaned. Fine. Then I guess I should point out that there's probably a way you can do this without a body. What's that? Asked Demi curiously. Vadrigan's soul crucible, explained the vampire. Where do you think Marius's body came from? Right, said Demi. They made a body for Marius. But then they did have access to Marius's soul because they had hidden it in Diyanah all that time, and then Panavar showed up and put the soul in a poppet. Nenarine nodded. I'm not an expert in this stuff like Vadrigan was, but as I understand it, the soul was never strictly necessary. Vadrigan boasted he could have resurrected Marius without Panavar ever having drawn him out of Diyanah. Apparently, they hid the soul mainly to prevent it from moving on. As you point out, once a soul is judged, resurrection becomes impossible. Vadrigan's soul crucible could also be used to draw a soul out of the river, one that, like Eutropia's is right now, was in transit, so to speak. All it required was an object of focus, something spiritually connected to the deceased. What kind of object are we talking about? Asked Martella, suddenly intrigued. You know her best, pointed out Nenarine. Could be anything she spent a lot of time with and would have imprinted on. Jewelry often works. Maybe a ring she always wore? A necklace, maybe? Aurelius had an idea. Could it be an animal? There was nothing that Eutropia held more dearly than Taldogus. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but I don't see any reason why that shouldn't work. Aurelius turned to Martella. Where's that lovable doggo right now? I brought him with me to the Palace of Birdsong after I left Mahetto last night, said Martella. The poor creature was there in the room with Eutropia when it happened, so he was really distressed. I'm one of the few humans he trusts right now. Okay, great, let's go collect him then. That seems like our best bet. Nenarine, where is the Soul Crucible now? Nenarine thought about this. Did you ever track down Vadrigan's lair in Yanmass? At the encircling Bower Theatre? She asked. No, replied Aurelius. By the time we met up with Vadrigan, he had moved on to the Caravanserai, where the defectors were stationed. I assumed he had mostly moved out of the theatre. Well, the Soul Crucible is big, said Nenarine. It's designed to essentially fabricate a human being, so he wouldn't have been able to move it to the Caravanserai. It can only be in one of two places. The first is that it's possible he simply left it in the encircling bower. It was pretty valuable to him, though, so there is a second option, too. What's that? He might have conveyed it to Panavar's private demiplane. Rukuk, said Demi softly. The Rusted Dreaming. Where did you hear that name? Asked Nenarine curiously. That was the name the Shulsaga tribes of the astral plane gave the place when they discovered it, before Panavar stole it, replied Demi. Of course he stole it, sighed Nenarine. He claimed to have built the place himself. Anyway, yes, there was a portal built between the encircling bower and the demiplane. Of course, you'd need Panavar's ring to be able to open it. This ring? Asked Aurelius curiously. I knew it had something to do with planes and mindscapes, couldn't puzzle it out myself. Aurelius drew forth the signet ring that he had peeled off Panavar's body. That's the one, said Nenarine. That's what Panavar used to study you all when you slept at the Palace of Birdsong all those months ago. Nenarine, if we enter this demiplane, what can we expect to find there? Asked Marius. Oh, probably Sakils. They're the things that helped him hide the demiplane in the first place. Maybe Goom and Travarak as well. I don't know. I had not spoken to them since Panavar disappeared in Leng. Well, we shouldn't waste any more time, said Aurelius. As Demi points out, we're on a ticking clock now, but I can only teleport 4 people when I go. That's going to be Diyanah, Demi, Marius, and Rankle. Nenarine, your advice has been helpful, so we're going to let you just walk out of here. If we need anything else from you, we'll cast sending. Anyone object to just letting her go? Wouldn't be my call, said Diyanah, cracking his knuckles. But if you all had listened to me, Carius would have been dead ages ago. Just saying. Suits me just fine, said Nenarine. As long as you all are planning to deal with Carius before whatever is left of Panavar inside the kid figures out I'm involved in this mess. I'm quite happy just to move on. Martella also sighed, but before she could say anything, Nenarine turned into a bat and fluttered out of one of the open windows. I really hope we don't regret letting yet another awful villain survive this whole mess, said Diyanah. Me too, said Martella. But I guess we have bigger problems right now than the Duchess of Blood. Do you really think you can bring Taldogus with you into Panavar's horrible demiplane? Aurelius drew out his trusty wand from his coat and tapped Raja on the nose. In an instant, the lion turned into a small figurine. Yeah, animals are easy to carry if you have the right spell, he replied. Martella nodded at this. Great, we can take my carriage to the Palace of Birdsong to collect Taldogus. Then, Aurelius can teleport you all to Yanmass. Succeed or fail, let me know as soon as you have more information. While you do that, I'm going to make my way to Opara and find out what Carius is doing at the palace. Be careful, said Marius to Martella. You don't know what's going on with Carius right now. If he's declared himself Grand Prince, and the Elfin Guard are obeying his command... I know, I get it, I'll lay low. I don't plan on staying in my town home when I'm there either. I'll stay at a familiar tavern that I think Carius might overlook. Oh yeah? Said Marius. Where's that? It's called the Abadar's Key, she said. I hear it's been extensively renovated and expanded since the Dockside fires. Marius's eyes lit up. You did that for me. Martella laughed. I promised you when this was all over you'd have the finest tavern in Opara. Go save Eutropia. Then come find me there when you're done. Hey, before you go to Opara, said Aurelius, there's one last thing you can do for us. There's a statue in the living room of a Rakshasa named Mylan Jareth. He's a member of the Immaculate Circle. If he's ever killed, he'll simply reincarnate, so I've turned him to stone. Would you mind finding some dark and forgotten corner of the world, somewhere we can bury Mylan so deep that no one will ever find him again? Martella gave him a firm nod. Consider it done. City of Yanmass, Avon Prefecture, Taldor, early winter. After they had collected Taldogus, Aurelius teleported the party back to the city of Yanmass. They wanted to get the lay of the land from a friendly face before continuing onto the theatre. After all, Pythiris had taken the city earlier in the fall, and Grand Duke Renjana's reinforced army had yet to return here. The party was not sure if they would be hunted by the city watch just traveling around. So he had brought them just outside the gates of the Navin residence. They spoke to one of the guards they recognized, and with some excitement he invited them in. Rundle was nowhere to be found, but inside they found Galindra Jonrek, recently reinstated captain of the Avon Prefecture Longbowmen, and their old friend Sepsinia, and of course her loyal familiar Pepper the Ferocious. Seeing Diyanah's cheerful grin come through the door, Sepsinia jumped up and gave the big man a hug. "Good to see you guys too," said Diyanah. "When did you get here?" "After you guys went to Zemar to hunt down Pytherius, Galindra checked in with the Grand Duke. You know he's kind of a boss." Galindra nodded this and added, "He asked me if there was any way we could scout out Yanmass and see what would await the army there. Like you guys, Sepsinia is always full of magical tricks." "That's right," said Sepsinia. "You guys aren't the only ones who know how to summon phantom steeds. Not as fancy as Aurelius' teleport spell, but Galindra and I left together ahead of the rest of the army to find out what's been going on in Yanmass, while you lot were fighting Pytherius in the south." "And so what's the scoop?" asked Marius. "Give us the details." "Baron Moston Custios died during the initial Yanmass attack. He was temporarily replaced by a Pytherius appointee, but after news of Eutropia's victory in Meheto reached the city, the Mercantile Council Chair Rudig Orton galvanized the rest of the council to take action. The City Watch rose up against Pytherius' remaining forces, and now Orton is acting Baron." "So the city is safe," noted Aurelius. "We believe so," said Galindra. "There won't be another fight, at least not here. They will welcome Grand Duke Renjana's return with open arms, I think. He'll be hailed a conquering hero." "You two haven't by any chance gone to investigate the encircling Bower Theatre?" asked Demi. You're referring to Vadragan Pole's old facility, that we never checked out the last time?" We didn't think to do that, no," replied Sepsinia. "We need to go there to try and track down something called a soul crucible," explained Diyanah. "Want to help us break in and check it out?" It was Pepper the Ferocious that answered, "Let's frickin' go!" The 5 companions wasted no more time. They were accompanied by Galindra, Sepsinia, and her tiny anthropomorphic pig companion to the dilapidated theatre located in Yanmass's old northern district called Churchside. Once a grand circular edifice, the encircling bower now lay in a state of slow decay, its stone marquee barely legible beneath layers of ivy and climbing rose. "The encircling bower welcomes you into its embrace," the worn engraving declared, though the building itself seemed more embraced by nature than welcoming to visitors. Gnarled vines wove through the crumbling brickwork, their tendrils stretching like fingers to grasp at every inch of the structure. Above them, the domed roof, still painted in a faded sky blue with wispy white clouds, rose to over 40 feet high. Its colors had long since muted with time, and patches of exposed brick marred the once serene illusion of an open sky. The theater's 2 grand entrances each stood 15 feet wide, but they had been sealed and chained, and those chains were further reinforced with a thick padlock. These would be no problem for Rankle to pick, but to be on the careful side, Demi cast a couple silent table spells to make sure the whole group was covered, and Aurelius did the same with castings of Invisibility Sphere. Then Rankle picked the lock, unhooked the chains, and opened one of the sets of doors. They carefully made their way inside. Beyond them, the theater's aisles stretched in gentle arcs, curving around the nearly circular stage. The benches, arranged in a sweeping semicircle, were layered with dust, their wooden frames warped by time. Below them, the auditorium's brick flooring had been worn smooth by centuries of patrons. The upper level, which looked like it might once have been a place of splendor, sagged precariously in places, its wooden floorboards creaking audibly overhead. However, despite its dilapidated appearance, braziers set into the walls and at the edges of the stage were lit, indicating someone was still using it. They moved carefully towards the stage, looking for access to a lower level, knowing that this would be likely where Vadragan and his Twilight cult would want to conduct their work. They found what they were looking for backstage, a flight of steps leading to a lower level. As they descended the staircase, the air grew cooler, thick with a scent of damp stone and something else, something acrid and metallic that set their nerves on edge. The steps carved from stone were slick in places with condensation, and their footsteps echoed faintly in the enclosed space. At the bottom, the passage opened into a broad hallway that snaked to the right and then back again to the left. The walls here were lined with ancient ceramic tiles that had cracked and buckled over time. Flickering torchlight illuminated the space, casting wavering shadows across the walls. Further down the tunnel, they could hear the slow, steady clanking of a heavy weight thudding regularly against the ground. They recognized this almost regular drumbeat for what it was, the footfalls of a clay golem, of the same type that they had encountered in the underlevels of the caravanserai, Vadrigan's obviously preferred security system. "Careful, everyone," said Aurelius quietly to the group. "Last time the clay golem had some kind of tremor sense. Our invisibility didn't prevent it from seeing us. Let me just cast a quick haste spell, and then let's get the drop on him." Aurelius weaved his magical spell around the party. "Now we attack!" cried Marius, surging ahead of the others. Marius's boots pounded against the worn stone as he closed the distance between himself and the approaching golem. As he rounded the corner, the clay golem emerged into view, its hulking form looming in the flickering torchlight. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, its vaguely humanoid shape was rough and unfinished, its surface marred by deep cracks and ancient sigils carved into its hardened flesh. Empty, featureless eyes glowed with a faint, eerie light as it registered his approaching presence. Marius didn't hesitate. He ducked low and drove his gauntlet with the blade retracted into the golem's side. The weapon blow was solid, and he could feel the impact run all the way up his arm, but the strike barely seemed to slow the construct. A massive clay fist swung towards him in retaliation, but Marius twisted away at the last second, the blow grazing past him with the force of a battering ram. Diyanah followed, moving with the speed of Aurelius's haste spell. He leapt onto the golem's back, using its own massive frame as leverage, as he drove a fist wreathed in dragon's fire into the back of its misshapen head. The impact sent a ripple through its body, cracks spiderwebbing outwards from the point of contact. Even as he did so, Diyanah flicked Raja's figurine out into the empty space behind the golem. Suddenly Raja grew to his full and mighty size, letting out a low growl, before sinking his fangs into the golem's left arm, holding it in place. In this length of corridor there were 2 sets of double doors leading to adjoining rooms. At this point they flung open. It was a who's who of their old enemies. From one set of doors, 2 dwarven monks wearing blue robes, decorated with circles and bearing the insignia of Raumia appeared, leaping towards Raja. From the other set of doors, 2 wolf-headed Rakshasa, belonging to Mylan's 7 Sins monastery, attacked Marius and Diyanah from the side. "Of course there's more of them," Demi called out, her fingers tightening on Dignity's barb. She took aim at the Rakshasa and fired bolt after bolt into the kukri-wielding monsters. Galindra copied Demi, drawing her longbow and firing a series of well-aimed arrows at their foes. This had the effect of drawing them out and away from the 2 fighters, towards the 2 heroes armed with ranged weapons. Rankle decided that Diyanah and Marius had the golem covered. He would be best served battling the dwarves. He activated his Phase Step ability, teleporting into the adjoining room and engaging both dwarves at once. He darted in, his twin scimitars flashing in the dim light. The Numerian blade hummed with energy as he slashed at one dwarf's knee joint, while Flametongue carved a molten arc through the air, searing a jagged line across the other's back. Behind Demi and Galindra, Aurelius and Sepsinia, the party's spellcasters, were preparing to protect the bard and the ranger, but suddenly the smaller left door behind them was kicked open. 2 black-robed Norgorbrite assassins lunged out of this door. They were being led by a creepy-looking figure in a black plague mask, accompanied by a halfling-sized shade. The spellcasters had no choice but to turn and face this new enemy. Then, just as the party thought these odds might prove overwhelming enough, from the walls themselves came 3 additional enemies, Ichko-Sakils. These cockroach-shaped creatures of horror were now well known to them, able to slip in and out of the ethereal plane. One came up behind Raja and attacked the great lion. Another engaged Diyanah and Marius alongside the golem. A third joined the 2 Rakshasa, and came bearing down on Demi and Galindra. It was going to be a difficult fight. In the center, Marius ducked under another of the golem's massive swings, his shield catching the brunt of the impact. His bones rattled from the sheer force. But he planted his feet and countered with a rapid 1-2 strike, his fists slamming into the construct's hardened form. His strikes were fast, but the golem was unrelenting, an inexorable wall of ancient magic and clay. Diyanah, still clinging to its back, struck again, his dragon-infused fists finding the fractures he had already created. His strikes ignited waves of searing fire against the creature's hardened body. Then the Ichko-Sakil joined the fray, its whipping, biting claws tearing Diyanah off the back of the golem. Diyanah tried his best to ignore the creature, though. He escaped its grasp, and with the golem still focused on Marius, Diyanah saw his chance. Channeling all of his energy into a single strike, he drove his flaming fist straight through the weakened cracks at the base of the skull. The golem seized, the massive limbs locking in place, before suddenly it crumbled into a pile of lifeless clay. The Sakil screeched in fury, its beady eyes darting towards Diyanah, but before it could react, Marius spun and drove Coriana's blade at the creature's chitinous skull. The punch dagger flared with energy, and the Sakil let out a horrific, otherworldly shriek before exploding into a sickening cloud of yellow ichor. As they battled their own Sakil, Raja had found himself locked in combat with a skittering horror of his own. The Ichko Sakil, its insectoid body gleaming in the torchlight, hissed with unnatural glee. Then, without a warning, the Sakil blurred, phasing out of existence for a heartbeat, then reappearing closer to the lion, its jagged forelimbs raking across his flank. Raja roared in pain, wheeling around with feline grace. He lunged, massive paws swiping at the creature, but the Sakil was fast. Too fast. It scuttled backwards, vanishing briefly before striking again from another angle. Its needle-like limbs stabbed into Raja's shoulder. But Raja was no ordinary lion, he was a guardian, one of the famous Grizantians, made even mightier by Diyanah's bond and Aurelius' blessing. With a deep, rumbling growl, Raja shrugged off the attack. His golden eyes burned with renewed fury. Instead of attacking wildly, he waited, watching, calculating. The Sakil, sensing weakness, lunged forward to finish him. And that was when Raja struck. In a blur of movement, the great lion leapt into the air, twisting mid-pounce to catch the Sakil mid-phase. His jaws clamped down on its elongated head, fangs piercing through its armored chitin. The Sakil let out a shriek, its many legs thrashing wildly as Raja's teeth crushed its skull. Inside the adjoining room, Rankle moved like a shadow, weaving between the two blue-robed monks. They struck at him with brutal precision. Powerful fists and iron-hard feet lashed out in a rapid flurry. But Rankle was even faster. He ducked under a sweeping kick, twisting his body unnaturally, before bringing both scimitars down in a vicious cross-cut. The dwarf to his left barely managed to block Flametongue with a bracer, but the burning blade bit deep, leaving scorch marks on his arm. The other monk, however, wasn't fast enough. Rankle's Numerian blade cut clean through his knee, severing tendon and dropping him to the ground. The burned dwarf grimaced, pulling a flask from his robes, likely a healing potion. But Rankle was already moving. He feinted left, then pivoted on his heel, driving Flametongue through the monk's chest. The dwarf gasped, eyes wide with shock, before collapsing. The last Raumia monk, bleeding heavily, ignored the damage to his knee and leapt forward at Rankle in a final desperate assault. The Cavern elf sidestepped with fluid grace, and with a flick of his wrist he slit the monk's throat. Further up the hall, Sepsinia and Aurelius both had the same thoughts. Mirror image and horrifying doubles, respectively, cast barely in time to serve as a magical defense against the Norgorberite assassins. Twin daggers slashed through the air, their dark blades dripping with virulent poison. Thankfully, Pepper the Ferocious was there to parry one attack made against Sepsinia with their custom-made short sword, but the assassin's second dagger slipped past, avoiding both the pig and Sepsinia's shadowy duplicates and cutting a thin line across her arm. The poison burned immediately. She gritted her teeth, fumbling for a healing potion to keep herself standing. Meanwhile, Aurelius proved a more formidable foe. His assassin had stopped in terror at the wall of demons that appeared to surround the wizard. Then Aurelius threw up a wall of force, cutting off the masked leader and the halfling-sized shade from the fight, trapping them behind the invisible barrier. He turned his attention to the assassins. Aurelius uttered an incantation. His fingers weaved a complex pattern in the air. A phantasmal killer spell. Black, crackling energy erupted around the assassin. A terrible fear filled him, and he gasped, clutching his chest as his heart simply stopped. This happened so quickly that the second assassin stopped as well, at the sudden and horrifying way his friend had just died. Sepsinia, recovering from the poison, raised her hands and ready to spell. "Aurelius," she said, "drop the barrier." Aurelius turned his attention back to the assassin's leader, who was still trying to figure out his way around the wall of force. With a smirk, he snapped his fingers and the barrier dropped. Sepsinia's readied lightning bolt arced through the air, claiming the life of the second assassin and dissipating the leader's shadow. The leader avoided the worst of the blast, though, darting aside before coming at Aurelius, lunging at the wizard with his magical short sword. The horrifying double's illusion kept Aurelius protected, however. He retaliated by casting a command word and freezing the man in place. "Let's try that one more time, Sepsinia," he suggested. Sepsinia summoned her witchcraft powers and unleashed another lightning bolt. This one cooked the warrior outright and dropped him to the floor. In the final conflict, Demi and Galindra stood their ground, loosing bolt after bolt, arrow after arrow. But their enemies were closing in. The two wolf-headed Rakshasas snarled with wicked grins. They weaved between the incoming shots, their kukris flashing in the dim torchlight. One of the fiends lunged, slashing at Galindra's legs with its enchanted blade. The wound cut deep, and she let out a sharp cry of pain, stumbling backwards. Demi, seeing her opening, fired a perfectly placed bolt straight into the Rakshasa's throat. The monster staggered, choking on its own blood before collapsing. The second Rakshasa, enraged, leapt at Galindra. She tried to raise her bow for another shot, but she wasn't fast enough. The fiend's kukri found its mark, sinking deep into her side. Blood sprayed across the brick floor as the ranger crumpled. "No!" cried Demi, eyes wide with horror. She fired again. 1, 2, 3 more bolts, each striking true. The Rakshasa fell, lifeless, beside Galindra's body. But Demi had no time to grieve. The last Ichko-Sackle scuttled towards her, mandibles clicking in delight at her pain. Before it could strike, however, a voice cut through the chaos. "I think not." It was Marius, still hasted from Aurelius' spell, coming up behind the Sackle with Coriana's blade. He was now an expert at killing these things, and he knew exactly where the soft spot was near the neck. He punched hard, driving his blade through the critical spot and killing it with a single savage attack. The battle was over. Their enemies lay slain. The encircling bower now silent once more. But the victory was not without cost. Demi knelt beside Galindra, hands trembling as she brushed a lock of hair from the ranger's pale face. Her crossbow dropped to her side. Marius and Aurelius exchanged solemn glances. Rankle, standing over the fallen Raumia monks, sighed heavily. Even Diyanah and Raja, still catching their breaths, lowered their heads in respect. Sepsinia ran over to Demi. Tears were streaking her face. Where Demi was fighting back tears, Sepsinia was openly sobbing. They had become fast friends since their battle together with Yander Mercondus and his crew. Demi also looked visibly shaken that she had let down her teammate. Marius could see this.
"There was nothing you could do," he murmured to her, placing a hand on her shoulders. "There were too many of them."
"It's okay," said Aurelius to both. "If we find what we're looking for, then this isn't the end for Galindra. Let's have a look around and see what we can find." Demi wiped the tear from her eye. "Let's go then. Sepsinia, you stay here, keep her safe. But collect yourself and keep an eye out. There may be more enemies still." End of chapter. Hi there, thank you so much for watching. You've just watched Season 6, Episode 2 of my Pathfinder 616 War for the Crown series. We're closing in on the end of our epic saga here. We're in the second of 5 episodes of my final season. So we're getting closer and closer to the end here. In this particular episode, we got a couple of events. We do a little bit of wrap-up at Abadar's Pillar. Then we meet with Martella back in Meratt County. And finally, we go to the Encircling Bower Theater. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those events and how they kind of played out. And maybe provide a little bit of GM insight as I do about some of the things that maybe surprised me or some of the things that I maybe ran a little differently from as scripted in the books. So the first thing is that at the very end of their adventures in Abadar's Pillar, they find out that, of course, Princess Eutropia has been assassinated. And this will prompt a discussion with Martella that looks a lot like the episode 1s that we've had of all the previous seasons. Essentially, this is a moment for the party to regroup, figure out what their new plan is going to be, what the next steps are to kind of resolve the situation. And so that is the thing that happens in Meratt County. But before they can go back to Meratt County, they do have a couple of final things that they have to do in Abadar's Pillar. One of which is that they find Emperor Stavian III is still alive. He has not died. Maxillar Pytherius lied about what happened to him. He's kept him under lock and key. This was cool because for me as a GM, I don't know how my players are going to react to something like that. And I wonder if viewers at home will be ultimately surprised that it's Marius that decides we're going to kill this guy, which in some ways feels a little, not only we're going to kill this guy, but also we're not going to tell Eutropia that we found him. We're just going to pretend like he was dead the whole time, which seems a little out of character for Marius, but I think it also suggests that through the various sort of compromises that they've made in their adventures, that Marius has changed a little bit since we saw him at the beginning. And I think that's kind of cool. You know, for better or worse, people are affected by the adventures that they undergo. So that was a cool little encounter there that we had. The other thing that they do is they pick up the Primogen Rod and the Primogen Crown, both of which are the artifacts of state. Now, obviously, in the adventures written, those artifacts would have wound up in the hands of Princess Eutropia before her death, because they would have acquired those before they go on their trip to Axis. I actually kind of like the way it worked out in my game a little bit more. There's some sort of, I guess, poetic injustice to the idea that they finally found the crown that they would use to crown Princess Eutropia, and she's dead and cannot be crowned. So all that wrapped up, the party then goes to Meratt County. One of the things that I thought would be really fun to do in Chapter 6 is to kind of bring the adventure inside out. So to revisit some of the key locations from the past that we go through here. So Going back to Meratt County was a lot of fun. Seeing Enora Piscum was a lot of fun. Really, once you have teleport online, they could meet with Martella anywhere. They could have met where Eutropia had been assassinated, which in my version of events was in the city of Meheto. But I really wanted to go back to Meratt County, and I thought that's where Martella would most comfortably meet with the party. It was good to see some of the old sights and sounds of Meratt. The party got to have a chill moment. The other cool thing is that, of course, I had a very different take on Nenarina Della. She's supposed to be one of the principal villains of this chapter, but she ended up being kind of an ally to the group, and Demi got to have, I think, a pretty interesting conversation with Nenarine over coffee. And the two of them, it essentially became an exposition vehicle. So Nenarine was able to explain that there are two other members of the Immaculate Circle, which we'll confront in the next chapter. And I was able to explain some stuff, like the Soul Crucible, which was necessary to kind of propel the adventure forward and give the players a way to solve the conundrum that they were in, which is that Princess Eutropia had been assassinated, and there was no body for them to use for a resurrection spell. There are some very high-level resurrection spells, like True Resurrection, I think, which function without a body. But my general approach to very high-level magic is that it's hard to come by. A bit like the Gate spell that Haojin cast. Those like level 8, 9 spells are not readily available, and it would not have been obvious for the players to acquire such magic, because those spellcasters that can use such magic are very rare and very hard to come by. So that was kind of my rationale for all of that. And ultimately, the way the adventure is scripted, they do want the players to go and seek out this Soul Crucible. One thing that is very different is that in the adventure as written, the Soul Crucible, or at the very least the entrance to the Soul Crucible, is actually in a town I think called Haydn, which is located in Porthmos Prefecture. And I really thought it would be more fun if my players went to Yanmass and also revisited locations from the third adventure that they had. Maybe they saw the Navin estate, met up with some of their old friends that were maybe over there. And that's kind of what led me to move the entrance, the kind of entrance to Panavar's demiplane, over to the Encircling Bower Theater, which handily my players never went to the first time around. So I finally got to use that map. I finally got to use that area, that location that we had seeded back in Adventure 3. Now suddenly it's important. And I also, because I'd moved many of the villains from that location to the Caravanserai, I knew that I had to kind of refresh what was going to be happening at the Encircling Bower Theater, and I had this idea that I would basically make it a grab bag of villains that they had already fought, to kind of see how they'd grown. So we had the monks of Raumia, we had the Rakshasa, we had all these villains that they had fought in previous adventures, sort of all grouped up and back together, and they faced a squadron of them located at the Encircling Bower before they could move on to the next thing. All of that was a lot of fun, and I think worked really well, and felt like the adventure had sort of like expanded out and was now kind of collapsing back in on itself in a really satisfying way. So all of that was really cool. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed it, and more War for the Crown coming at you the week after next.